So there are only two randomized studies that have been done for masks and COVID. And they looked at cloth masks and surgical masks. And in both studies, there was zero effect. So the most recent one was the Bangladesh study. And what we did is we got a hold of the original data set that was used for the paper, and we did the graphs. There is no difference at all between wearing a cloth mask and not wearing a cloth mask. The curves were identical, and they misrepresented it in the study as showing that it works. If you actually look at the data and you plot the data, and you can get the data because it's publicly available, you will find that the curves are identical. There is no difference between the cloth masks, and the surgical masks were in between the cloth masks. So if you had a red cloth mask, it worked. If you had a purple cloth mask, it didn't work at all, and the surgical masks were in between the two. In other words, it's all statistical noise. These masks do not work at all, and the N95 masks are maybe slightly better, but only for a very short amount of time. If you're in a room with someone for any amount of time, even with an N95, it's not going to work. The only mask that is proven to work is the one that they don't tell people about and that nobody wears. This is the only mask that works. So this is called a P100 mask. It is 150 times more effective than an N95 mask. This is the only mask that has a chance of working. It's never been tested for the coronavirus, but it should be 150 times better than almost zero.
I'm a little reluctant to even have you talk about it because I'm afraid the Biden administration just might allocate about $100 billion to send those out to everybody.
Yeah. But here's what it's like. So you put this arm like this, and then you strap it, and then you talk to people just like this. And this will filter it out. But there's a
problem. I'm afraid they're going to require that for air travel. So,
but one important thing is that this mask works only in one direction. It will work to protect you,
but not somebody
But there's no filter on the outside, because if it was filtered on the outside, you wouldn't be able to breathe.
Right. Okay.
So it works, but it only works one way, and if they were really serious about protecting the American public, they would require everyone to wear this, in which case everyone would rebel and we would have no mask mandate.
And of course, one other point on masks, and we don't have a psychiatrist unless somebody wants to speak to this, but I think it's obvious. I don't think we really need the harm done to our children in terms of development, speech. I mean, all these things have been written about widely. I mean, just even their oxygen levels.
Senator Johnson, there's one important study that actually ties everything up. It was the Swedish study by Ludvigsson, and he was canceled because of this study. He looked at the 1.95, I think you mentioned it.
1.8, I thought.
1.9 million Swede kids across the entire pandemic, from 0 to 16 years old, all in primary school, secondary school. And what they found was that there were 0 deaths in Sweden in children. And what was critical about that study was that there was no lockdowns, there were no school closures, and there were no masks. It was not even testing whether you had masks and it worked. There were no masks, and there was 0 deaths. And that was an actual seminal study. And thank you for mentioning it.
Well, again, we've talked about the stratification of severe illness with COVID that's been ignored, but Dr. Urso.
Yeah, I just wanted to enter into the record, clean this up a little bit. Masks have been looked at for 3 decades or so, where there's been randomized controlled trials. So there's roughly, 12 or so randomized controlled trials. There's 0 randomized controlled trials that show masks stop the spread of respiratory disease, and that's including N95. And for everyone, N stands for non-oil resistant, 95 stands for 95% airborne particles, of which all viruses fit through. So I usually tell people that, wearing an N95 also has not been shown in randomized controlled trials to be effective. But more importantly, the capsule on these viruses are an oil capsule, And I tell people it's like peeing in a pool. It goes right through. It doesn't stick to water molecules. It's an oil capsule virus. At the end of the day, the data is what it is. There's zero randomized controlled trials at all showing that mask stops better upper